The wine glass trembled slightly in my hand as I stared across the candle-lit dinner table at Julia. My Julia. The woman I had spent the last 4 years loving, the woman I had meticulously planned a life with, the woman who had just asked me, calmly, casually, as if she were discussing the weather, if we could open our relationship, weeks before our wedding. The world around us dulled, as though the walls of the upscale restaurant had folded inward, trapping us in a moment that felt both surreal and suffocating. I studied her expression, searching for hesitation, a crack, something that would tell me she didn't really mean it. But her gaze held steady, her lips slightly parted, waiting for my response. An open relationship, I finally managed to say, my voice betraying none of the icy storm brewing inside me. She nodded. I love you, Ethan. I do. But I also believe that love should be expansive, not limiting. I think we should experience other people, grow, and then choose each other every day, not because we have to, but because we want to. A part of me wanted to stand up, throw my napkin on the table, and storm out. Another part of me, one that I wasn't particularly proud of, wanted to say yes just to understand why. Why now? Why this? Why, after all the vows we had written, after picking out invitations, venues, and wedding cakes, was she suddenly interested in sharing our love with others? Instead, I leaned in, my tone deceptively soft. You want to see other people? She reached for my hand, her touch warm and familiar. I want us to explore. Together. This doesn't change how I feel about you. I exhaled slowly and set my glass down. All right, let's do it. A flicker of surprise crossed her face before she quickly masked it with a smile. Really? You mean it? I nodded, though my agreement was not given lightly. Yes, but on one condition. She tilted her head, intrigued. Anything. I picked up my phone and, with measured movements, pulled up the Notes app. We write down everything, full transparency, no secrets. We document every interaction, who, where, when, how it made us feel. If we're going to do this, we go all in. Julia hesitated, but only for a moment. Okay, that sounds fair. It was a gamble, a risky one, but I had a plan. Over the next few weeks, we played our roles. Julia was eager, diving into this new world with an enthusiasm that both fascinated and unnerved me. She met people, went on dates, and, true to our agreement, documented everything in a shared digital journal. So did I. But while Julia was exploring connections, I was following a different trail. I wasn't just logging my interactions. I was investigating, tracking, piecing together inconsistencies in her stories. And the deeper I dug, the clearer the picture became. This wasn't a spontaneous request. It was premeditated. One name kept appearing in her journal. A man I recognized, though she had never mentioned him before. A man whose details I cross-referenced with past receipts, text messages, and subtle shifts in her schedule. A man who, I discovered, had been in her life for far longer than she had let on, and then I found the contract, a legally binding agreement dated months before our dinner conversation, detailing financial arrangements, assets, and dissolution terms, not of our future marriage, but of a business deal between Julia and him. My stomach tightened as I read the fine print. He was funding our wedding, the house we had picked out, her dream honeymoon, everything. But why? The answer came in the form of an overlooked email in her drafts folder, a message she had started but never sent, one that made my blood run cold. After the wedding, we can move forward. He will never suspect a thing. My hands trembled as I locked my phone and looked at her sleeping form beside me. The woman I loved was a stranger, a strategist, a liar. But she had underestimated me. The night before our wedding, I invited her to a private dinner, a mirror of the one where she had first proposed the open relationship. This time, I was the one holding the power. I slid a printed copy of the contract across the table, watched as her face drained of color. You played your hand well, Julia, but you should have folded while you had the chance. Her fingers tightened around the edges of the paper, knuckles whitening. Ethan, I can explain. I leaned back, savoring the moment. No need. I already have. To the police, to my lawyer, to everyone who matters. And as for tomorrow, there won't be a wedding. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. For the first time, Julia was speechless. I stood up, leaving the contract between us like an unclaimed corpse. Consider this our official breakup, and trust me, this is the only contract you'll ever get from me. Then I walked away, leaving her alone with the wreckage of her own making. All right, let's explore what happens next. Perhaps Julia isn't the type to go down without a fight. As I walked away from that dinner, the weight on my chest felt lighter, but only for a moment. I had won the battle, but something in Julia's silence unsettled me. She had always been quick-witted, always had an escape route, and yet she had just sat there, staring at the contract like a checkmate she hadn't seen coming. I should have known better. The next morning, I woke up to chaos. My phone buzzed nonstop with messages, friends, family, even my boss. I sat up, rubbing my temples, and opened the first one, Julia's social media post. I never thought I'd be betrayed by the man I loved. A day before our wedding, Ethan uncovered a deeply personal contract that had nothing to do with infidelity, but he twisted it to break my heart. He humiliated me, left me with nothing, and now I have to start over. I hope no one else experiences the pain I'm feeling right now. The comment section was a nightmare. People calling me a monster, a manipulator, a man who left his fiancée at the altar over a misunderstanding. I clenched my jaw. This wasn't over. Would you like Ethan to fight back, uncover an even deeper secret, or take a different route entirely? I should have expected this. Julia wasn't just going to accept her downfall quietly. No, she would spin the story, play the victim, and try to make me the villain. But what she didn't realize was that I had anticipated this move. I scrolled through the comments. Friends expressing their sympathy, distant relatives demanding answers, strangers rallying behind her. My inbox was flooded with messages ranging from concerned to outright furious. Then I saw a text from my best man, Ryan. Dude, what the hell is going on? Call me. Now. I dialed immediately. He picked up on the first ring. Please tell me you saw this coming. His voice was sharp, edged with disbelief. I exhaled. Not exactly, but I had a feeling she wouldn't go quietly. Man, you need to get ahead of this. She's got everyone thinking you blindsided her over some dumb misunderstanding. I know, but I have proof. Silence. Then a slow, deliberate breath. How bad is it? I looked over at my laptop, where Julia's contract, the financial records, and that unsent email were neatly saved in a folder labeled Checkmate. Bad enough to ruin her. The last move. I knew I had two options. Go public. Expose the truth. Post the documents, the timeline, everything. Let the world see who Julia really was. Play the long game. Let her dig her own grave. I had already given the evidence to my lawyer. Maybe it was better to let her believe she had won until the consequences hit her where it hurt. I stared at my screen, my finger hovering over the trackpad. One move would end it quickly. The other? A slow, inevitable collapse. Then an idea struck me. I picked up my phone and called Julia. She answered after 3 rings, her voice soft but laced with triumph. Ethan, I wasn't expecting to hear from you. I let the silence stretch. You wanted a game, Julia. You wanted to test me. You thought I'd be weak, that I'd walk away quietly. You thought I wouldn't fight back. She chuckled, the sound dripping with amusement. Ethan, sweetheart, I didn't have to think. I knew. I smirked. Then why are you so nervous? That moment, just a fraction of a second, where she inhaled too sharply, hesitated just a little too long. That was all I needed. You can have the sympathy of strangers, Julia. Enjoy it while it lasts, because soon they're going to see everything. I hung up before she could respond. It was time to make my final move. Do you want Ethan to go full scorched earth, or should he play a more subtle, strategic game? I didn't go scorched earth, at least not right away. That would have been too easy, too predictable. And if Julia had taught me anything, it was that the most dangerous attack is the one they never see coming. Instead, I played the long game. Step one was silence. I let the storm rage. I let Julia bask in the pity of well-meaning fools who thought they understood heartbreak. I let the comments pile up, let her soak in her manufactured victimhood. And while she was busy reveling in her false victory, I was making moves in the background. I called my lawyer. Send the documents to the right people. You sure? He asked. Once this gets out, there's no undoing it. I leaned back in my chair, staring at my reflection in the dark laptop screen. That's the point. Step 2. The unveiling. 2. Days later, the first crack appeared. A financial journalist picked up the story, not from me, of course. Just a leak. The article was titled, Ex-Fiancé of Ethan Carter Linked to Suspicious Financial Agreements with Mysterious Benefactor. No one in the general public knew what it meant yet, but those who mattered, they started paying attention. Julia's name, which she had so carefully associated with heartbreak and betrayal, was now attached to words like scandal and fraud. I knew Julia had seen it because, for the first time since her public betrayal, she called me. I let it ring. Then she texted Julia. Ethan, what did you do? I smirked. Now she was the one playing defense. But I wasn't done yet. Step 3. The collapse. A few more leaks followed. Screenshots, the contract, a certain unsent email. The internet did the rest. People who had defended her started backpedaling. Her Instagram comments turned from sympathy to skepticism. Some of her supporters even messaged me, asking for my side of the story. I ignored them all. But the final blow? That came when her benefactor, the man funding her perfect life, realized she was no longer an asset, but a liability. One moment, she was Julia, the brilliant, beautiful woman with an endless supply of admirers. The next, she was toxic, untouchable. A cautionary tale. The last message she ever sent me read, Julia, you ruined me. I stared at the words for a long time before finally replying. Me. No, Julia. You did that all by yourself. Then I blocked her. Game over. Epilogue. The rebuild in the weeks that followed, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Peace. I didn't look back. I didn't seek revenge beyond what was necessary. I had made my move, and I had won. Now I could finally walk away. One evening, as I sat in a quiet bar, sipping whiskey and watching the world move on, a woman slid into the seat next to me. She gave me a knowing smile. You look like a man who just finished a very long game. I chuckled. Something like that. She extended her hand. Well then, maybe it's time for something new? I shook her hand, and for the first time in a long time, I was ready. The end. That's the final move. Satisfying ending, or would you like a different twist? I thought it was over. I should have known better. 3 months after Julia's downfall, my life was finally normal again. No more media attention, no more chaos. I had rebuilt my reputation, kept my head down, and even started dating again. Casually. This time. No more blind trust. Then, late one night, a notification popped up on my phone. Unknown number. We need to talk. I frowned, but before I could ignore it, another message came in. Unknown number. I know the real reason Julia wanted an open relationship. Call me. I sat up in bed, heart hammering. It had to be a bluff, a desperate attempt to pull me back in, and yet something about it felt different. I hesitated for a moment, then typed a response. Me. Who is this? Unknown. Number. The man who should have married her instead of you. My blood ran cold. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Want to continue? If so, do you want a deeper conspiracy, more mind games, or something completely unexpected? I stared at the message. The man who should have married her instead of you. Was this a joke? Some bitter ex who had been lurking in the background? Or had I missed something even bigger? Something Julia had been hiding all along. I should have ignored it. Should have blocked the number, erased the message, and gone back to my life. But I didn't. Instead, I called. The line rang twice before a deep voice answered. Ethan, took you long enough. Who the hell are you? I asked, gripping the phone tighter. The voice chuckled. You already know. If I did, I wouldn't be calling. A pause. Then, meet me at Pier 17, midnight. The line went dead. I sat there for a moment, my mind racing. This had to be a setup. Some ploy to drag me back into Julia's mess. And yet, something gnawed at me. Julia had played me once, had almost won. What if I had only uncovered the surface of her deception? I exhaled sharply, grabbed my jacket, and headed for the door. The Yale Pier. The air was thick with salt and secrets as I arrived at Pier 17. The docks were mostly abandoned at this hour, save for a few flickering streetlights that cast long, eerie shadows across the wooden planks. I spotted a figure leaning against a rusted railing, smoking a cigarette. As I approached, he turned. And that's when my blood ran cold. Because I did know him, Nathan Carter, my half-brother. I hadn't seen him in years. Not since our father had cut him out of the family for reasons he never fully explained. Nathan smirked, flicking his cigarette into the water. Surprised? I clenched my fists. What the hell? Do you want? He crossed his arms, watching me like a cat sizing up a cornered mouse. You think you're the only one Julia played? The words hit me like a slap. Excuse me? Nathan chuckled darkly. You were just the latest, Ethan. But before you, there was me. The truth about Julia Nathan told me everything. How he and Julia had been together years ago. How she had wormed her way into his life, just like she had done with me. How she had convinced him they were meant to be, before betraying him in a business deal that left him financially ruined. She was always after something, he said bitterly. Money, power, control. She played me just like she played you. The only difference? I figured it out too late. I stared at him, my mind spinning. Why tell me this now? Nathan exhaled slowly. Because she's not done. You thought you ended her, but Julia's like a virus. She's already rebuilding. New name, new city, new target. A chill ran down my spine. Who? Nathan pulled out his phone, swiped through a few pictures, and held it up. My stomach dropped. It was a photo of Julia, now going by the name Sophia Reynolds, smiling, hand in hand, with a man I recognized instantly, Ryan, my best friend. Endgame, I felt the familiar burn of anger rising in my chest. But this wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was war. I met Nathan's gaze. We stop her, together. His smirk widened. Now you're talking. This wasn't over. Julia might have thought she had escaped. That she could start fresh, manipulate another man, erase her past mistakes. But this time, she had made a fatal error. She had underestimated me. To be continued? Do. You want Ethan and Nathan to go full detective mode, set a trap for Julia, or take a completely different approach? Nathan and I sat in silence for a moment, the waves lapping against the pier as the weight of the situation settled in. Julia wasn't just a con artist, she was a predator, and Ryan, my best friend, was next in line. I clenched my jaw. How long has she been with him? Nathan scrolled through his phone. About a month, but she's working fast. Faster than she did with you. He paused, then added, She's learned from her mistakes, I scoffed. She hasn't learned enough, Nathan smirked. That's the spirit. I turned to him, my mind racing. If we're going to stop her, we can't just confront Ryan. He won't believe us. We need to show him who she really is. Nathan exhaled. I was hoping you'd say that. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a flash drive. I've been tracking her since she left me in ruins. She's not just playing rich guys, Ethan. She's laundering money, blackmailing people, and if my instincts are right, she's got something on Ryan. I stared at the flash drive, my stomach twisting. How bad is it? Nathan gave me a dark smile. Bad enough that by the time we're done, Julia won't be able to con her way out of this one. The game begins. Step 1 was gathering intel. Nathan. And I spent the next few days following Sophia Reynolds. She had changed her look, but not her patterns. Expensive restaurants, high-end boutiques, always attached to Ryan's arm, flashing the kind of smile that made men believe she was the one. Ryan, oblivious as ever, was falling fast. She's got him exactly where she wants him, Nathan muttered as we watched from a cafe across the street. The engagement won't be far off, I shook my head. Not if we get to him first. Step 2. The warning confronting Ryan directly wouldn't work. I knew him too well. If I just threw accusations at him, he'd assume I was acting out. Of jealousy. So we staged something better. We arranged for Ryan to receive an anonymous package. Inside, the flash drive, loaded with photos, financial records, and a recording of a conversation Nathan had with one of Julia's previous victims. Then, we waited. Hours passed. No call, no text. Then, at exactly 11:47 p.m., my phone rang. Ryan. Meet me now. Step 3. The realization. I found Ryan pacing in his apartment, the flash drive plugged into his laptop. His face was pale, his eyes darting between me and the screen. Tell me this is fake. His voice was shaking. I folded my arms. You know it's not. He ran a hand through his hair. Jesus Christ, Ethan, I was going to propose. I felt a pang of guilt. I had been him not long ago, blind, convinced that Julia was my future. I know, man. I exhaled. But you're lucky. You found out before it was too late. Ryan stared at the screen, then slammed his laptop shut. So what now? I met Nathan's gaze. Now, we end this. Step 4. Checkmate. Julia had played us, lied to us, used us, but this time, we were the ones setting the trap. Nathan leaned forward, his smile sharp and deadly. I say we let her. Walk right into it. And so, the real game began. To be continued? How do you want them to take Julia down? Should they expose her publicly, set up a con of their own, or let her destroy herself? If there was one thing we knew about Julia, Sophia, it was that she thrived on control. She manipulated, she schemed, she twisted people's realities until they saw only what she wanted them to see. So we were going to do the same to her. Step 1. Make her feel untouchable. Ryan played his part perfectly. The next morning he called Julia, his voice thick with emotion. I can't believe how lucky I am to have you, she giggled. Aw, baby, what's gotten into you? I was up all night thinking about us, about the future. She took the bait immediately. Me too. I've never been so sure about someone. She was good, but we were better. That night, Ryan took her to the most expensive restaurant in town. He let her order the wine. He let her pick the conversation. He played the perfect, love-struck fool, just like she needed him to be, and when she wasn't looking, Nathan and I were watching from a nearby table, setting the final pieces in place. Step 2. The perfect crime. We knew Julia wasn't just after love. She was after leverage. She liked to sink her claws in deep before making her move. So we gave her something irresistible, a secret worth stealing. Ryan let it slip, casually, drunkenly, that he had been approached for a major investment deal. Something big, something worth millions. Julia's eyes sparkled. "That's amazing, babe," she cooed, running a hand down his arm. "You must be so excited." Ryan hesitated, then sighed. "Honestly, it's kind of stressful. The money's locked up in another account right now. It's complicated." Julia tilted her head, her expression perfectly concerned. "Oh, baby, maybe I can help?" There it was, the opening we needed. Ryan gave her a hesitant, uncertain smile. "I don't know. I'd have to think about it." We already knew what would happen next. Julia couldn't resist an opportunity like this, and soon enough she'd make her final, fatal mistake. Step 3. The fall 2 days later, Ryan woke up to an email from Julia. It was innocent on the surface. Just a casual suggestion that he transfer some of the funds into a private account, just to keep them safe from prying eyes. Ryan called me immediately. She took the bait. Now, we had everything we needed. Fraud, financial manipulation, attempted theft, and the best part? She had put it all in writing. Nathan leaned back in his chair, grinning. She just screwed herself. I exhaled. Now we end this. The confrontation. Ryan invited Julia to his apartment that night, setting the stage for the final act. When she arrived, she was glowing, beautiful, confident, completely unaware that the walls were closing in. "Hey, babe." She leaned in to kiss him, but Ryan stepped back. Her smile faltered. "What's wrong?" Ryan exhaled. "I know, Julia." She blinked, her expression carefully neutral. "Know what?" That's when Nathan and I stepped out of the shadows. Her eyes widened, just for a second. Then she laughed, shaking her head. "Wow, this is a little dramatic, don't you think?" Nathan held up his phone. "We have the email, the recordings, the receipts. We know everything." Julia's face flickered, just for a moment, before she plastered on a pitying smile. "You boys really think you've outplayed me?" I met her gaze. "No, we know we have." Silence stretched between us. Then Julia's mask cracked. Her smile dropped. Her shoulders straightened. And for the first time, I saw her for what she truly was. Calculating, dangerous, but cornered. "Fine." Her voice was cold. "What do you want?" Nathan smirked. "Simple. You disappear. For good." I stepped closer, my voice calm but firm. "No more cons. No more reinventions. You vanish, or we make sure you never recover from this." Julia's jaw clenched. Then, after a long, tense moment, she smiled. "You win." But something in her eyes told me this wasn't the last we'd see of her. The aftermath. The next morning, Julia was gone. Her social media accounts were wiped. Her number was disconnected. It was as if she had never existed. Nathan and I sat at a bar that night nursing our drinks. "Think she'll come back?" I asked. Nathan chuckled. "Oh, definitely. But next time?" He lifted his glass. "She won't be our problem." I clinked my glass against his, exhaling for what felt like the first time in months. Julia was gone. And this time for good. Or so I thought. Because 2 weeks later I received a letter. No return address. No signature. Just one line, written in perfect looping script. "You only think you've won." I stared at the words, my pulse steady, my mind already working through the next move. Game on. To be continued. Do you want Julia to strike back, or should Ethan finally escape the game? The letter sat on my desk for a week. I didn't open it immediately. In fact, I had the damn thing in my hands for 3 days before finally gathering the courage to read it. But once I did, I knew we weren't finished. You only think you've won. The words were simple, but their meaning dug deep. Julia wasn't done. She wasn't even close. I crumpled the letter and tossed it in the trash, but even then it felt like a shadow followed me. The lingering knowledge that Julia was out. There, waiting, plotting, gnawed at my nerves. The silent storm days turned into weeks. I kept my head down, stayed out of the spotlight. I was no longer the man in the story, no longer the wronged fiancé or the victim of a cruel con. I was simply done. At least I thought I was. One night I received an encrypted message from an unknown source. A video file. My instincts told me not to open it, but curiosity won out. I clicked. The message. The screen flickered to life, revealing a familiar face. Ryan. I leaned in. This wasn't possible. Ryan, was he involved in this? Was this some kind of twisted game Julia had set in motion? But then Ryan spoke. If you're watching this, then you know what's coming. Ethan. I never meant for any of this to happen. I felt my chest tighten. Julia, Ryan's voice broke. She's playing us both. You don't know the half of it. The video flickered again, and Ryan's face blurred as if someone had tampered with it. The thing is, Ethan, she's not who you think she is. You have to trust me. She's dangerous, not just because of her con games, but because she's in deeper than you can imagine. I froze. She's working with someone high up, someone who controls everything. The video ended abruptly. No. Instructions. No contact info, just that warning. The investigation, I couldn't ignore it. Not after everything that had happened with Julia. I needed to know the truth. I reached out to Nathan. He'd been keeping tabs on Julia's movements, tracking every lead. If anyone knew what was going on, it was him. We met in a small, dimly lit cafe, the kind of place where secrets were exchanged without a second glance. Nathan slid a folder across the table. This came across my desk last night. I opened the folder and saw it. Dozens of photographs. Julia, Ryan, a man I didn't recognize. And in every photo, the same thing. The same high-rise buildings, the same private jets, the same corporate meetings. I've been digging into her past, Nathan explained. And I found a pattern. Julia was never in this alone. She had help. And not just some random criminal. We're talking about powerful people, people in the shadows. I looked at him. You're saying she was working with them the whole time? Nathan nodded. And Ryan's tangled up in it. He's too deep now. But what's worse? He doesn't even know who he's working for. My mind reeled. This wasn't just a con anymore. This wasn't just a woman who played with men's hearts for sport. This was something much darker. The plot unfolds. Nathan and I spent the next few days running down leads, tracking down the man in the photos, piecing together the web Julia had spun. We discovered something chilling. Julia wasn't just after money. She was building something, a network of influence, a shadow organization controlling politicians, businessmen, even law enforcement. She had been setting up connections for years, all while pretending to be the victim, the innocent girl swept up in love. But now she was more dangerous than ever. She wants power, Nathan said quietly, his eyes narrowing. And she's using Ryan as a pawn. The confrontation. The day came. I arranged to meet Ryan at a secluded park, somewhere quiet where no one would overhear our conversation. He was still naive, still convinced that Julia was some kind of angel. But after everything I had learned, there was no room for doubt left. Ryan arrived, his face drawn. as though he hadn't slept in days. "Ethan, what's this all about? Why are you still digging into her?" I exhaled, my voice steady but firm. "Because Ryan?" "She's not who you think she is," he frowned. "What the hell does that mean?" I handed him the folder. "Look at the photos. Look at who she's been working with. And when you're done, tell me you can still stand by her." Ryan's hands trembled as he flipped through the pages. The more he saw, the more the color drained from his face. "No, this can't be real." His voice was strained. She wouldn't do that." I stared at him, feeling that familiar sting of betrayal. "She would, Ryan. She already has." There was a long silence before Ryan finally spoke. "I need to know everything. Tell me everything, Ethan." The last move together, Ryan and I built our plan. We couldn't just confront Julia, not now. She had too many resources, too many people backing her. But we could expose her. We spent weeks gathering evidence, tracking, down witnesses, collecting data. Everything Julia had worked for, her empire of lies, was about to come crashing down. Julia was always several steps ahead. She knew how to make you feel like the victor, only to pull the rug out from under you when you least expected it. But this time, the tables were turning. The game was changing. And this time, I was the one, in control. Ryan and I had everything. We had the evidence, the recordings, the bank transfers. Everything that could expose Julia's network for what it truly was, nothing more than a house of cards waiting to collapse. But there was one thing we didn't have. Her. Step 1, the exposé. We'd planned it meticulously. We were going to unleash everything, expose Julia to the world in a way she couldn't deny, couldn't twist, couldn't escape. Ryan and I arranged to meet with a journalist who had been digging into the corruption Julia had woven into her web. A respected, no-nonsense reporter named Sophie Reynolds, ironically, a distant cousin of Julia's. She had been investigating the same people for months, but couldn't get solid proof. We could help her with that. The meeting was set for late afternoon in a nondescript office building. No one would expect it. As I arrived, Sophie was already there, going over the evidence we had painstakingly gathered. She looked up, her eyes sharp as ever. "You ready for this? Because once it goes public, there's no going back." I nodded. "We've waited long enough." Ryan sat beside me, tension written all over his face. This wasn't just about exposing Julia anymore. This was about redemption, about taking back control of our lives. She won't see this coming. Step 2, the unexpected. Twist. Just as Sophie was preparing to leave with the files, my phone buzzed. I looked down to see a message, one that made my blood freeze. "Julia, Sophia Reynolds. You're making a mistake, Ethan. I told you. There are people watching, people who will stop you." The room felt colder. Sophie shot me a concerned glance. "What's going on?" she asked. I exhaled, trying to keep my composure. "It's her. Julia. She knows." Sophie hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "We can't back down now. You've got the upper hand." But my gut told me something else. Something wasn't right. I had underestimated Julia before, and I couldn't do it again. Before I could respond, the door to the office opened. Ethan. "Ryan. Sophie." It was Nathan, but he wasn't alone. Behind him stood a man in a dark suit, his expression unreadable. "We need to talk," Nathan said quietly, his voice unusually tense. "And I suggest you listen." Step 3. The unlikely alliance. We followed Nathan into the hallway, away from the prying ears of others. The suited man stayed close behind. "What is this?" I demanded, already on edge. Nathan's face was grim. "This is the part where I tell you I was wrong." Ryan stepped forward, his fists clenched. "Wrong about what?" Nathan exhaled slowly. "About Julia. You're not dealing with just her anymore. You're dealing with a lot more than you realize." The man in the suit spoke for the first time. his voice deep and cold. Julia is just a pawn. You've been chasing shadows. I took a step back, confusion clouding my thoughts. What are you talking about? The man in the suit met my gaze. Julia was never working alone. She was always part of something bigger, an underground syndicate, one that controls everything. Politicians, business tycoons, even law enforcement. You're not just facing a con artist, you're facing an empire. My head spun. You're saying she's not just playing us? Nathan's eyes were hard. No, she's playing you like a game of chess, and you've been focused on the wrong pieces. The suited man stepped forward. I suggest you back off. The people behind Julia won't let this go. You're in over your heads. Step 4. The decision, a wave of realization hit me hard. The syndicate. The people Julia had been working with. The ones I hadn't even begun to understand. What had I gotten myself into? Had I been blind all along? I turned to Ryan and Sophie, trying to gauge their reactions. Ryan's face was pale, but there was something in his eyes. A determination I hadn't seen before. What do we do now? He asked. Sophie's voice was steady, unwavering. We keep going. My heart pounded in my chest. Are you crazy? These people have power we can't even begin to fathom. Sophie met my gaze with a fire in her eyes. So what? We've come this far. We've already won one battle. The truth's out there, Ethan. We don't back down now. Nathan stepped closer, speaking softly. They're going to come for you. If you push forward, they'll fight back. I took a breath. The weight of everything pressing down on me. The danger, the unknowns. But there was one thing I was sure of. I couldn't walk away. Not now. We finish this. Nathan's eyes flashed with something unreadable. I can't stop you, but if you keep going, don't say I didn't warn you. Step 5. The showdown. We made our move that night. Sophie had arranged for a secret meeting with a whistleblower who had been inside the syndicate, someone who knew everything. The tension in the warehouse felt suffocating. Julia's smile, the one that used to be so disarming, was now a twisted mask. Behind her, the suited man stood tall, his eyes scanning us coldly. You think you've got it all figured out, don't you, Ethan? Julia's voice was low, venomous, but there was something almost admiring in the way she looked at me. You think you can expose me, destroy everything I've built, but you're missing the biggest piece of the puzzle. I stepped forward, my eyes narrowing. I'm done being a pawn, Julia. You've been playing us for too long, but the game ends tonight. Ryan stood beside me, his fists clenched, eyes burning with the same resolve. Sophie, however, had taken a step back, her eyes darting between Julia and the suited man. Something about this felt wrong, too rehearsed. You're out of your depth, Ethan, Julia continued, her voice ice cold. This isn't just about me. This is about something much bigger, something you can't even begin to comprehend. You don't know who you're really up against. I felt a chill in my spine. Her words were like a threat, but beneath the surface, I could sense a deeper game at play. Before I could respond, the suited man spoke. You've seen too much. His voice was firm, cold as steel. Now it's time for you to understand the consequences of that. The showdown. The air crackled with tension. I wasn't sure who was playing who anymore, but I knew one thing. There was no backing down. Julia's hand moved slowly to her side, where a sleek black device rested in her palm. Do you think I came here unprepared, Ethan? You're about to learn just how far I'm willing to go. Ryan took a half step forward, his eyes wide with realization. You're going to kill us? Julia's laugh was a chilling sound, devoid of any warmth or mirth. No, Ryan. I'm going to watch you fall apart, just like you've been falling for months. And when you do, when you finally understand the true nature of what's happening here, it'll be too late. I glanced at Sophie, who seemed to be searching the room for an escape route. But there was none. The warehouse was locked down tight, and the suited men were strategically positioned to cut off any potential escape. And then, just as I thought I'd lost all hope, I saw something. The faintest flicker of movement from the far corner of the room. "Now," a voice whispered from the shadows. "Now, we end this." I turned just in time to see Nathan stepping forward from the darkness, a smirk on his face. "You think I've been sitting on the sidelines, watching you play this out?" He stepped forward into the dim light, revealing a gun in his hand. "No, Ethan, I've been playing my own game, and it's time you understood that." The room seemed to freeze. The betrayal eyes stared at Nathan, disbelief flooding my mind. "You?" I choked on my words. "You've been working with her?" Nathan's smirk didn't waver. "Not exactly, but I always knew you'd be too predictable, Ethan. You were too caught up in trying to expose Julia. You thought you were saving Ryan. You thought you had the moral high ground." Julia's eyes gleamed with a cruel delight. "He's right, Ethan. You've been nothing but a pawn in a game you couldn't even begin to comprehend. You and Ryan have been so focused on your own little world, you missed the bigger picture." Ryan looked from Nathan to me, his expression a mixture of confusion and disbelief. "Wait, what does that mean? Who are we really up against?" Nathan's eyes flicked to Julia. "You think she's the mastermind here? You're wrong. It's not just about her or even me." He laughed softly, his tone dark. "It's about power. The kind of power that controls everything. Politics, the economy, the media." I felt my stomach drop. This wasn't just a woman playing with people's lives. This was something monstrous. A force that had its tendrils wrapped around every corner of society. And I'd been too naive to see it. Nathan continued, his voice colder now. "You and Ryan, you were just stepping stones. Julia knew what she was doing from the start, setting you up, pulling the strings. But now, you'll finally see the truth. You'll understand what we've all been building." I backed away slowly, my mind racing for any way out. "What do you want from us? What's your end game?" Julia stepped forward, her gaze fixed on me with a predatory gleam. "End game? There's no end game, Ethan. It's just the beginning. You've been too focused on tearing me down. You didn't realize you were feeding the very system you wanted to destroy. The choice." Everything seemed to slow. My heart pounded in my chest. I could feel the weight of their words, the realization dawning on me that this wasn't just a simple con. This was a full-scale operation, one that had been years in the making. Ryan's voice broke the silence. "So what now? What do we do?" I turned to him, my mind working in overdrive. "We fight." Sophie, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "We can't win this the way we've been trying." The warehouse door slammed behind us with a resounding thud, but the weight of what had just happened pressed harder against my chest. We had made it out of their grip, for now. But I knew Julia, Nathan, and the others were already planning their next move. And I had a sinking feeling they were far more dangerous than I could ever imagine. As we huddled in the dim light of a nearby alley, I looked at Sophie and Ryan. They both had the same steely determination in their eyes. We'd crossed a line, but we weren't turning back now. "We need a plan," I said, breaking the silence. My voice was hoarse, but it held a note of finality. "We can't fight them head-on, not yet, but we can play the long game." Sophie's eyes narrowed. "You're right. This isn't just about exposing them anymore. It's about survival." Ryan's fists were still clenched, the anger in his eyes raw. "They think they can control us. They think they have all the pieces, but they're wrong." "We still have something they don't. The truth." I nodded. "Exactly. We know who they are, and more importantly, we know how they work. We've seen their network. Now we just have to dismantle it, one piece at a time. Step 1. The leaks. We." Couldn't just go straight to the media, not yet. If we did, we'd be killed before we even got the chance to tell our story. Julia had people everywhere. Her syndicate was infiltrated into the very fabric of power, business, law enforcement, and politics. Going public meant playing straight into their hands. Instead, we needed to be smart. Sophie worked tirelessly that night, going through the information we'd gathered. She sent anonymous leaks to the press, financial discrepancies, hidden accounts, mysterious transactions, anything that would slowly start unraveling Julia's empire from the inside. But we weren't just leaking information. We were planting seeds of doubt. Step 2. The Phantom. While Sophie set up the leaks, Ryan and I worked on something even more dangerous. We had to turn the tables. We needed to make Julia think we were out of the picture. The key was Nathan. He thought we were done, but he didn't know how deep the rabbit hole went. I needed to get inside his mind, draw him into a trap. I had one contact left, an old friend from my days in the underground world of corporate hacking. A man named Victor, known only as the Phantom. If there was anyone who could infiltrate a system, it was him. And he owed me a favor. Step 3. The double-cross Victor worked quietly, getting into Nathan's secure communications, siphoning off enough intel to lead us to his vulnerabilities. The breakthrough came when we found something unexpected. Nathan wasn't as untouchable as he thought. There was a deal, one that involved Julia and a group of high-profile international figures. But the deal wasn't just about money. It was about control over a multi-billion-dollar operation involving tech, politics, and global trade. That's when it hit me. Nathan wasn't just working with Julia, he was using her. I reached out to Victor. Get me the intel. All of it. I want to know everything. Victor's response was simple. Done. Step 4. The deception. The next move was a delicate one. We had to plant enough false information in Nathan's system to make him think we were still on his side. We needed him to believe we were still playing his game and not the other way around. Sophie and I set up a series of encrypted messages, making it look like we were planning to reveal Julia's connections with the syndicate to the press. We knew Nathan would see it and bite. The breaking point days passed. The leaks in the media were starting to gain traction. Small companies tied to Julia were being investigated. Bank accounts were frozen. People in her inner circle were beginning to panic. But the real bombshell came when the police raided one of Julia's private properties. They found evidence, hard, undeniable evidence, that tied her to several unsolved criminal operations. The syndicate's reach had been exposed. They were no longer hidden in the shadows. I thought we were winning, and then everything came crashing down. The trap late one night, we received a phone call from an untraceable number. I knew instantly who it was. Julia. Her voice, as always, was smooth. Too smooth. You think you've won, Ethan? You think you've taken control? I clenched my jaw. We've exposed you for what you really are. She laughed, but it wasn't. A pleasant sound. It was full of malice, of rage. You've barely scratched the surface. And you don't understand the game you're playing. Nathan was just a pawn, Ethan. He never had control. But you... Her voice lowered, taking on a dark, dangerous tone. You've made a critical mistake. Suddenly, I realized it. The leaks, the raids, the investigations, it was all too perfect, too easy. You're playing me, I muttered. This was all a setup. Julia's laugh echoed through the phone. You were never in control, Ethan. You think I'm the one. Who's been running thing? The phone call from Julia haunted me for hours. Every word she said had been a carefully calculated move, meant to rattle me. It worked. The pieces were scattered, and for the first time, I wasn't sure what the next step was. But there was one thing I knew for sure. Julia's game was far bigger than anything we had imagined. She wasn't just manipulating us. She was manipulating everyone. The syndicate wasn't just about money, corruption, or power. It was about control. Total control. Every move we made, every piece of evidence we leaked had only been a part of her strategy. She had been testing us. We'd been on the chessboard, and we hadn't even realized it. Step 1. The mastermind. The first thing we needed to figure out was who, exactly, was pulling the strings behind Julia. Nathan had been a pawn. Julia had been the queen. But there had to be someone else, someone in the shadows, calling the shots. I turned to Sophie. She had been a rock in this storm, but even her calm demeanor had started to crack. Sophie, we need to find the mastermind. Whoever is running this syndicate, they need to be exposed. Otherwise, it's all for nothing. She nodded, her eyes intense. We need to trace the money, the deals, the power. We've barely scratched the surface. There's a pattern in the data we gathered. We need to dive deeper. Ryan's voice cut through the tension. We've been so focused on Julia, we've missed the real threat. Who's been backing her? Who's been funding this empire? We had all the pieces. Now, it was time to fit them together. Step 2. The web of influence. Sophie worked late into the night, poring over the evidence we had. There were dozens of shell companies, accounts set up in offshore locations, and the names of people that kept showing up over and over again, people who seemed to have no connection to Julia on the surface. But there was something about them, a link that none of us had caught. She found it. One name stood out, a name that had been buried beneath the noise of the syndicate's dealings. Lucas Hargrave. Lucas Hargrave. The name meant nothing to me at first, but Sophie's eyes widened when she saw it. Hargrave, she whispered. He's untouchable. He's been a shadow figure in international politics for decades. No one even knows what he really does. But he's been connected to so many high-profile criminal organizations across the globe. I felt a chill run down my spine. So, this is bigger than we thought. Julia isn't the top dog. Ryan clenched, his jaw. This guy's been hiding in plain sight. He's the one pulling the strings. We need to find him. Step 3. The hunt. Begins Hargrave's name was everywhere, but it was buried deep in a labyrinth of untraceable digital footprints. Sophie worked tirelessly to piece together his history. What we found was enough to make my stomach turn. Hargrave wasn't just an influential figure in crime. He was connected to the highest echelons of power, international governments, the financial world, even law enforcement. He was a ghost. A man who could make entire systems bend to his will without ever stepping into the light. The more we uncovered, the more it became clear. Hargrave had orchestrated the entire syndicate. Julia was just his puppet. Nathan was merely a middleman. The empire they had built was far-reaching, spanning continents, and they had been playing us like fools from the start. But the question remained, where was Hargrave? Step 4. The shadow. Network. We couldn't go to the authorities. Not yet. Hargrave's influence was so pervasive that even the police were compromised. The only way we had left was to take matters into our own hands. Sophie had an idea. We need to go offline, she said. We've been too reliant on the digital trail. It's time to go old school. Ryan and I exchanged a look. You mean physical surveillance? I asked, trying to process what Sophie was suggesting. She nodded. Exactly. We need eyes on the ground. We need to infiltrate Hargrave's world, not just his digital empire. If we can get close to him, find his weak points, then we can take him down. It was risky. It was dangerous. But it was our only option. Step 5. The contact. We needed a lead. Someone who could give us access to Hargrave's world. Someone who had been close enough to see the cracks in his empire. That's when I remembered someone from my past, Ivy Daniels. Ivy was a former associate, a journalist who had investigated powerful figures in the criminal underworld. She was one of the few people who had come close to exposing Hargrave's operations before disappearing without a trace. But I had heard rumors. She was still alive, and if anyone could help us get to Hargrave, it was Ivy. I reached out to her through an encrypted message, knowing full well that contacting her was a risk. But it was one we had to take. Step 6, the reveal, the message. Came through a few days later. Meet me at the old pier. Midnight. Bring no one. It was vague, cryptic. The pieces were falling into place. Ivy's warnings had shaken me, but they only strengthened my resolve. Hargrave wasn't some nameless figure behind a desk pulling strings. He was the string itself, woven into every corner of the world. We were about to expose the heart of darkness, but first we had to survive it. I turned to Sophie and Ryan after our meeting with Ivy. We can't let fear control us. We have to strike first before Hargrave even realizes what's happening. Sophie, always the strategist, was already thinking ahead. We need more than just information. We need leverage. Something Hargrave values so much that it'll make him flinch. Ryan was quieter than usual, his mind clearly working through the enormity of the task. We need to isolate him. We can't take down a global empire by just attacking its surface. We need to hit its foundation, tear apart the webs he's spun, and we need to do it in a way that he won't see coming. Step 1. The ghost of Hargrave Victor, my old contact, had been working in the shadows for us, quietly digging into Hargrave's operations. He had the skill set to navigate Hargrave's encrypted networks, and over the past few days he had uncovered a shocking truth. Hargrave, for all his power and secrecy, had a vulnerability, a big one. There was one project Hargrave was deeply invested in, something he couldn't afford to lose. It was a massive tech company, a subsidiary involved in AI research and data manipulation, the future of surveillance, and Hargrave had been using it to build a global surveillance grid. This wasn't just about power or control, this was about rewriting the future itself. Victor's message was chilling. I've found it. The project's code name is Nexus. It's more than just a corporation. It's a machine, a global monitoring system that ties into every major intelligence network in the world. Ryan looked at me with grim resolve. If we expose Nexus, we expose everything. It's the last piece of the puzzle, Sophie nodded. But if we're going to do this, we need to get into Nexus itself. We can't just leak documents. We need evidence, something concrete that proves Hargrave's connection and makes the world take notice. Step 2. The infiltration. We had no choice but to go directly into the heart of Hargrave's operations. The team we had built was tight-knit, but this mission required precision, stealth, and the kind of bravery that only comes from knowing you're walking into the jaws of a beast. Ivy helped us get closer to Nexus. She had a contact, an insider, who worked within the company. Her name is Laura Winters. She's one of the lead engineers for the project, but she's in too deep. She's seen things that could ruin Nexus. She wants out, but she needs protection. Ivy gave us Laura's contact details, and we arranged a meetup in a remote location. Step 3. The betrayal. Laura met us at an old, abandoned coffee shop on the outskirts of the city. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. You have no idea what you're up against, she whispered, glancing over her shoulder like someone might be watching. Nexus isn't just some project. It's an extension of Hargrave's power. He controls everything, information, surveillance, even the very people around him. She spoke quickly, as if every word could cost her life. I was a part of it, helped build it even. But the more I saw, the more I realized. We're not just collecting data. We're controlling lives. If Nexus goes online, there's no more freedom. Everything will be monitored. Every person's move, every decision will be watched, tracked, and manipulated. I felt my stomach twist. How do we stop it? How do we get to the heart of Nexus? Laura's face hardened. You can't just go in and take it. Nexus has its own security, top level, untraceable. But there's a way. I've been working on a back door, an access point. That could expose the entire system. I just need help to get inside. We looked at each other, knowing this was the moment of truth. We're in, I said, but we need to move quickly. The longer we wait, the more dangerous this becomes. Step 4. The back door Sophie, Ryan, and I accompanied Laura to one of Nexus's lesser-known facilities, an old data center buried beneath the city's industrial district. The building had been repurposed, now housing rows of servers and data processors designed to run Nexus's global monitoring system. As we entered the facility, I could feel the weight of what we were about to do. If we succeeded, we'd bring Hargrave to his knees. If we failed, we'd never walk out of here alive. Laura led us through a maze of security systems. Every hallway was lined with cameras, motion detectors, and infrared sensors. But Laura knew the layout like the back of her hand, and she guided us with confidence. "This is it," she said, stopping before a seemingly ordinary door. She pulled out a device from her bag, a small but intricate piece of tech that looked like something out of a spy movie.